I asked you to do 5 favorites, 5 train wrecks, 5 disappointments. What's the title?
I did 5 biggest bummer seasons through week 3. So the fan bases are just like, this isn't kind of going the way we were hoping it would go. So I was trying to figure out the right way to phrase it through 3 weeks. So that's what I came up with.
So 5 biggest bummers. We're going to go 5 to 1. So your 5th biggest bummer is who?
San Francisco 49ers. They're 1-2. They blow a 10-point lead against the Rams. I'm not writing them off, but if you were a 49ers fan going into the season and you're like, this kind of feels like a Super Bowl hangover season with all the offseason drama. Now Christian McCaffrey's going to Germany, Bill, which you've been on this for like 10 years. It's not good when a guy goes to Germany.
I got a bunch of texts. They're like, oh, Germany, watch McCaffrey. Here he is.
Yeah, it's like you've been making that joke for a decade, and now it's actually a headline. Christian McCaffrey is going to Germany to get his Achilles checked out, so that's not great. They played without Deebo Samuel and George Kittle on Sunday. Their defensive tackle, Javon Hargrave, is now likely out for the season. So it's like all these things together, and I actually think Brock Purdy's playing well. Like their offense had over 400 yards of offense on Sunday without any of those guys. He was really good. So that's the bright spot. If you're a Niners fan, you're like, we still have Shanahan. Purdy's playing well. We can still save this thing. But just the injuries and then the way the defense is playing and you're 1-2, it hasn't gone the way you would have liked.
Yeah, so if we're thinking about this 3 months from now and the Niners are fine. We're like, oh, remember after week 3?
Yeah.
We'd probably look back and go, well, Minnesota defense, week 2, they were buzzsaw, right? Week 3, bunch of injuries. They're up 14-0, fake punt, game flips, and the Rams just kind of steal the game. And then we panicked. We're like, oh my God, the Niners, what? And then all of a sudden they were fine. I guess the Hargrave thing was the one that really made me pause, because now you're going to be able to run on them, I would assume, unless they have some secret dude, up their bench who's just going to come in and stuff the run. I already felt like they were a little vulnerable. It felt like you could move the ball on them and throw on them, especially if you're behind. And now it feels like you're going to be able to run on them, combined with they pay Ayuk, who hasn't really done anything. Yeah. They get this crazy game out of Jennings. Deebo and Kittle getting hurt is the least surprising. I'm just factoring that in. Those guys 8 games a year, but my big fear for them, Sheil, is that the NFC West might be really good. It might just be one of those where we might have 3 playoff. Sal and I talked about it Sunday. There might be 3 playoff teams, and I don't even know which 3 it's going to be. I've been really impressed by Arizona. I think they're legit, like a little frisky. So, I look at the Niners and I go, are they one more injury away from being the year from hell team? Because right now it's either them or the Rams for the year from hell team, right? Unless you're going to say Cincy.
Yeah, I'm with you. You kind of give their offense the benefit of the doubt. Like the floor is going to be pretty high unless like Purdy goes down or one more injury happens. But defensively, they make that coordinator change in the offseason, and now they've got injuries, and like their defense was not good in that. I mean, their defense their defense and special teams blew that game. I really don't think it was the offense's fault on Sunday. So you're right. I mean, there's no walkover in the NFC West where you just like chalk that up to a win. The Cardinals can score. The Rams can score as long as Stafford's healthy, and then the Seahawks can kind of win in different ways. So yeah, I'm with you. That division's going to be competitive all the way through.
Do you agree with me on Arizona? Because I thought they've had 2 losses, and I really thought both losses were good losses. I think you can have good losses. I was impressed with how they hung with Buffalo. I was impressed with how they hung last week. I think they're in these games. They hung with Detroit. Detroit felt like they were going to go up by 30, and they just never did.
Yeah, I think offensively, I buy into the Cardinals. I think Kyler was a little bit off last week, but he was really good the first 2 weeks. So I think they're going to be able to move the ball and score most weeks. They might have like the most gettable defense, though, in the NFL.
In the NFL, yeah.
Like the Lions couldn't put them away last week, but I just think if you look at it week to week, I mean, they just don't have players on defense. I don't know what scheme you draw up there. So that's what I worry about, but I think they'll play entertaining games, and I think their offense is going to keep them in a lot of games.
Don't sleep on how bad Washington's defense is. I mean, Burrow, Cincinnati, I don't think they punted yesterday.
They didn't.
All right, so on the Niners, last thing. It's probably more fun for the NFL if they have a year from hell season, just because that's going to infuse some new blood in the NFC. The big picture piece, though, of this is the last year with Purdy on the deal that he's on. And you start thinking about windows with the NFL, which are always 3, 4, 5 years maybe, and then you really have to reinvent your window. And that was my feeling with them heading into the year. Like, what's the window of this team? Can they sustain it? Can they extend it? And this has not gone well. And now having McCaffrey hurt, the reason you got McCaffrey for not even having to give up a first-round pick is because he's injury prone. Well, he lasted a year, he got injured. So there's some red flags everywhere, but Rams have red flags. Arizona's defense.
Yeah.
Seattle's already banged up. Has lost a couple guys they can't block. So fascinating division. All right, let's go. Your number 4 biggest bummer.
Number 4 is the Chicago Bears. And I was deciding, should I put them on here? Because if you're a Bears fan, you're like, we still get to watch Caleb Williams every week. We still have hope. There's some excitement here. But the infrastructure around this guy is a complete disaster. They are 32nd in offensive DVOA through 3 weeks. They've had the worst offense in the NFL. Their offensive line is a mess. Do you want to guess what their running backs are averaging yards per carry?
It can't be more than like 3 yards a carry, right?
2.3 yards per carry, Bill.
God.
56 carries for 130 yards. They had this sequence against the Colts where they have 1st and goal from the 4-yard line. They go direct snap to Khalil Herbert. Then they go 2 more runs to Khalil Herbert. And then on 4th and goal, they run one of the worst plays you'll see all season. Speed option with Caleb Williams. They lose. Who loses 12 yards on 4th and goal from the 1? Like, we've watched a lot of football. I've never seen that before in my life. So I was thinking, like, if The Athletic came out with an article this week and was like, the Bears haven't been practicing this season, I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that's what it looks like. It's looked like that since week 1. So this isn't like a Caleb Williams take. This is just like, do they know what they're doing there? Because the Colts maybe had the worst run defense in the NFL. They couldn't run the football on them. Caleb Williams, I think, dropped back to pass like 52 times in that game. They're having issues with just like calling timeouts before 2-point conversions and stuff. They don't look like a well-coached team. I thought their formula coming into the season was very good defense, and can you create like a mediocre offense? Can the line be good enough? Because I think that would have been good enough to make the playoffs, and their offense just right now is a complete disaster. So the Bears, to me, as someone who picked them to make the playoffs, and now they're plus 290 to make the playoffs after 3 weeks, they're having a bummer of a season.
They can't block.
Yeah.
They are number 1 on the they can't block rankings, somehow ahead of the Patriots, who also can't block. But that play you mentioned, that 4th down play, I had all the games on, and they were in the left corner TV, and I'm watching everything. And I knew it was 4th down, but 2 things happened. And then I look back, and I just see a Bears guy going backwards. And I'm like, wait, what? Why is that guy going backwards? I thought it was 4th down. And they somehow ran a play that had somebody go backwards 8 yards. The coaching, it's really tough to say this with Sirianni and Doug Peterson and some of the coaching disasters we've seen this season, but I think Eberflus is up there as they seem the least prepared. The coaching decisions during the game are bad. It doesn't seem like they have any idea how to use timeouts or challenges. And then for Caleb, when they can't block for him, they still have him going back and, going backwards and trying to look for guys for 4 or 5 seconds. And he doesn't have 4 or 5 seconds. So, before the season, Jaden Daniels was, I think, 6-1 for Rookie of the Year. And Caleb was plus 120. And we talked about it on our future pods. I know you did too. We're like,
yeah,
why are those odds so different? Like, what evidence do we have that Jaden Daniels isn't in as good of a situation as Caleb? And everyone was saying, this is the best situation anyone's walked into. They can't fucking block, and their coach sucks. So not a good situation.
And you need a coordinator in 2024 where if you don't have a great offensive line, they can scheme around it. Like we see that with guys, Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan. You look at those teams and you're like, oh, they don't have the best offensive lines, but they figure out ways to scheme around it. And Shane Waldron of the Bears, like I was like, all right, this guy, it seems like an upgraded offensive coordinator. They're not doing anything to scheme around their offensive line weaknesses. And now you look at Seattle, he came over from the Seahawks and it's like, Seahawks look like they're operating a little bit better without him. So now you have to revisit that coaching decision. So yeah, if I were a Bears fan, I would just be like, we can't let Caleb Williams develop bad habits this season where it's like next year or 2 years from now, it's like, oh, well, that rookie year, they couldn't block for him. And so he started bailing from the pocket or, he sustained an injury. That has to be like their number one goal for the rest of the season. I thought it was going to be their goal going into last week because they're facing the Colts. It's like that should be a get right game. And meanwhile, they still can't run the football or protect him.
Who leads the league in Zach Wilson's this year of going back to pass, immediately panicking and rolling out to the right and then throwing it out of bounds? Because it's It's Caleb or Deshaun probably in the finals for that, right?
Yes, well, that's got to be Deshaun Watson, who we will get to here in a minute.
Okay, let's go. What's your number 3 bummer?
3 is the Cincinnati Bengals. And I have been in on the Bengals. I've been saying, the Bengals are going to be fine. And they're 0-3, Bill, but their offense is really playing well. They have a top 5 offense by any metric you look at. You mentioned it. Monday night, they did not punt. They did not turn the football over. 7 possessions, 4 touchdowns, 2 field goals, and a missed field goal. If they would have gotten 1 stop on defense, 1 forced punt, they win that game. They're 1-2. We're saying, wow, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, that looked great. You know, the Bengals kind of turned their season around and they can't get a stop on defense. And so now they're 0-3, where since 2000, I think one team has made the playoffs after they're 0-3. And so the bummer is just that like if you would have told me before the season, Bengals are 0-3, what would we have said? We would have said, oh, Burrow's not healthy. Oh, did Jamar Chase get injured? The offense, it's just not working. No, Burrow's healthy and playing well. Chase is out there. Higgins is back. The offense is working, and they're still 0-3. And so now you zoom out and you say, well, they might lose Higgins after the season. And how many healthy seasons are you going to get from Burrow going forward? I mean, hopefully a lot, but you don't know. And so I feel like they're kind of wasting a season right now at 0-3, although I might be the only person in the world who's still like, I'm not totally out on them. It's a long season. Let's see what happens. But yeah, they've just dug themselves a hole unnecessarily.
Yeah, I'm looking at the 0-3. So, wow, 2018 Texans was the last one, 11-5.
Wow.
Before that, 1998 Bills, 10-6.
Whew.
95 Lions, 10-6. It's in the last 30 years. There's been 3 total.
Not likely. Yeah.
I'm kind of with you. Look, their defense sucks. I don't know what happened to it. They didn't have a pass rush at all. I don't think Hendrickson's healthy, but it just feels like you can move the ball on them whenever you want. And we've seen that over and over again. But I liked how they played against the Chiefs. I liked how their offense looked last night against a crappy Washington defense. The question for me is, what's the 7 seed win total? If it's 9, I can't count them out. If it's 10, that means they have to go 10-4 down the stretch. They're in a really hard division, right? And their defense isn't good. And 10-4 doesn't seem realistic to me, but 9-5 isn't inconceivable.
Yeah, it's defensively, I don't know what their answers are. Like they had a couple defensive tackles out last night, but it's like you have to figure something out. I mean, their run defense was an issue last year and going into the season, and it hasn't been fixed at all here. So I don't know that there's a fix. I think they could be a feisty team. I think their offense, like if you just look at it historically, if you have a top 5 offense, you're in the playoffs every year. Like if you could take everything else out of it, and there's almost no precedent for having that good of an offense and not making the playoffs. That's why I'm not totally counting them out, but it does feel like, man, what a wasted opportunity. They were what were they? 7.5 point favorites in week 1 against the Patriots, something like that. And then 7.5 point favorites on Monday night. You lose both those games. Like they went into the season with an easy schedule, and now 2 games that were supposed to be easy wins, you lost both of those. So
the Pats
they're
loss
in a tough
was
spot.
Indefensible. I mean, they scored 10 points against the Pats. Yesterday, they didn't punt. So in 2 weeks, in week 1, they seemed like a team that hadn't practiced or run any preseason reps. In week 3, their offense actually looked good, and it still didn't matter. I can't count them out yet, because what did we see? The Packers last year were 3-6 and made the playoffs.
Yeah, something like that.
If the Bengals can get to 3-6, but there's teams I like more in the AFC, I guess would be the counter, right? Definitely Buffalo. Probably the Jets. There's an AFC South team. I'd like Pittsburgh more than Cincy. I just think their defense is better than anyone in that thing. I would take Baltimore over Cincy at this point. Yeah. And then Chiefs. And where do you stand on the Chargers?
I mean, now that like Herbert's dealing with the injury, they have one way they can win. Like they can't win in multiple ways. Maybe their defense continues to play well and they reel off a couple 50-yard runs each week. I think they're going to be well coached, and I think they're going to be competitive and feisty. I'm not sure that they're going to make the playoffs, but I think they'll be in the mix. So
they had a bunch of injuries off that week 3 game. And I think so they're going to lose to the Chiefs this week. Suddenly they're 2-2 and maybe they're just going to be too banged up this year. And if Herbert re-injured that ankle, and that's not going to be right for a couple of weeks. So maybe they're out. So maybe we have one AFC West team, one AFC South team. I think that's safe. Buffalo and the Jets. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be 3 from the AFC North.
Yeah. They got a
so
chance.
That would be the path.
I'm not counting them out,
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, especially like if Cleveland, I'm sure they're coming up right now.
They're next.
So yeah. So maybe it is 9-8. 9-8's doable. All right. Who's your number 2 bummer?
Yeah, it is the Cleveland Browns, and there's really a case for them to be number 1. I mean, you look at this team. I don't think we've appreciated how terrible Deshaun Watson has been. Like when we talk about it, we're like, oh, he hasn't lived up to the hype. He hasn't been quite what they expected. Last 3 years, Bill, 39 quarterbacks have had 500 dropbacks. He ranks 36th in success rate, ahead of Davis Mills, Zach Wilson, and Bryce Young. Like, it's time to take the kid gloves off when we talk about just his on-field performance, let alone the off-field stuff. He's been one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL for 3 years.
Wasn't he been one of the worst Browns quarterbacks like ever? Like Austin Gale had a tweet about that. About and the Browns have had 2.5 decades of terrible quarterbacks, and he's like at the bottom.
Yeah, they're 31st in offensive DVOA. They've had offensive line injuries. I understand that. The quarterback makes the offensive line injuries worse. He's got to be one of the worst quarterbacks to block for. He's a disaster under pressure. He's getting sacked on 12% of his dropbacks. And so now what do you do if you're the Browns? Because of the contract they gave him, which was the only way they were going to get him, because they were the only team that was going to give him that guaranteed contract. The minute they gave him that deal, he became the most powerful guy in the organization other than the owner. Because now if you're the owner, you say, we're tied to him for 2 more years. You're going to bench him for Jameis Winston, and we're paying our backup $46 million per year, and we gave up all that draft capital. So that's one option. 2 is you keep trotting him out there. I mean, I don't know where that's going to get you. You've had years to figure this out, and now you have your worst offensive line situation, so you can't do that. And then look ahead to the offseason. Can you run this back in 2025 with the same coach, the same GM, and the same quarterback and say it's going to be different this year? I don't think so. I think the coach and the GM are pretty good. Like, I think they would get hired pretty quickly if they were out there on the open market. And now you have this lawsuit and these allegations of sexual assault. So is he going to be facing a suspension? It's just like, this is one of the most hopeless situations in the NFL. They have no chance to compete in the AFC with this guy, and they also have no way out of this.
Yeah, I remember this happened to the Celtics in the mid-2000s. They traded for Vin Baker, a max contract, and he had a bunch of problems. It turned out he had alcohol issues. And his contract just went forever. And the way the salary cap worked, you just looked at it. And this was like, I might have even written about it at the time, 2003, 2004. And you just look at it and you go, oh my God, there's no way out of this for 3 years. Like we're basically... We're in the salary cap league, and one of our max spots is just a throwaway 0. And this Cleveland situation is way worse than that.
Yeah.
Because it's the quarterback position. Really, it seems like the only move is to bench him, but now you have sullen, angry, overpaid Deshaun Watson on your bench who might, God only knows what he could do for team chemistry. But I don't see any other solution other than to just send him away from the team. Just like, we'll send your checks every 2 weeks. If I'm the owner, and I guess that's what this guy Haslam's thinking, you guys got to make this work. If you don't make this work, I'll bring somebody else in to make it work. Yeah. It's the owner has to realize this has no chance, and it doesn't seem like that's happened yet, right? Because they would have replaced him already.
Yeah, I mean, he would because he signed off on it. Was he a driving factor or did? Yeah, so it's like
he's the one who guaranteed the money when Watson's like, I don't want to go to Cleveland, and Haslam's like, what if we guarantee all the money?
Exactly.
Like, all right, I guess I'll go to Cleveland.
I mean, think about it. No quarterback's gotten that since. There have been a lot of great quarterbacks who have signed deals since, and we thought, is this going to set a precedent for quarterbacks? Nope. No other team has been willing to do this with any other quarterback. They got desperate. They signed him to that deal. They're 1-2. They have the hardest remaining schedule in the NFL. If you look at the betting markets and just like, team win totals and Super Bowl odds. And so there really is no way out for them. I mean, if you look at
Chubb, they said, maybe Chubb can come back week 5. Right. It's like, I have Chubb on all my fantasy teams. They're saying like week 9. It's not going to be week 5.
Yeah, the offensive line injuries, everything. So Russell Wilson has had the biggest dead cap hit in NFL history, which is just like the amount of money on your salary cap to people who aren't on your team. That was $85 million. I think Watson would be like double that.
Yeah,
if they were to just say it's like 170 if they cut him. So it's like Is that feasible? At some point, you're just going to be like, sunk cost, nothing we can do. But I don't know if they're going to be at that point yet or not.
You know what's funny? You would think in the 2020s, we have the history of all the mistakes people have made over the last however many decades of football or any sport. We have way better advanced analytics telling us how to make decisions. We have smarter people. We have even podcasts are smarter and shows are smarter. And there's all this good information we have now. And yet we've seen three of the biggest mistakes in the history of the NFL. Russell Wilson, the Bryce Young trade, and Deshaun. I've been following the NFL for, 5 decades. Those are three of the biggest mistakes since I've been a football fan. And they all happen within the span of 3 years. It's crazy. How are we still making mistakes like this?
Yeah, I was thinking about it with the quarterbacks especially, and we'll talk about Trevor Lawrence in a minute here, but like watching Josh Allen last night, it's kind of like there is no swing big enough to acquire a player like Josh Allen. He is going to lift everyone around him. Yeah. You can make mistakes elsewhere on the roster, and you're probably going to still win 10 or 11 games. So when you have a chance to get a guy of that caliber, you can take almost any big swing, and it'll be justified. But how many of those guys are there? 3? Maybe 4, and now you have this big middle class of quarterbacks where it's like, do you want to make excuses for this guy and say he's good and it's the situation around him, or do you not want to? Like you could have those arguments for basically guys like 6 through 20. We could say, well, they're good here because their offensive line is good. They're bad here because their scheming's bad. And so you can't take the big swings unless you just have a great feeling that it's going to be one of those top 4 or 5 guys. Otherwise, the big swings for just like a competent guy who can be good under the right situations, those don't make sense. They're too high risk and too low reward.
I would include Dak Prescott in that for $60 million a year. And I might be able to find Sam Darnold or Geno Smith or Baker Mayfield and have an extra $50 million a year to spend on other parts of my roster. The problem is if you don't find those guys and it's like, shit, now we have this guy instead, then it's trouble. All right, that leads us to
Then you're the Arthur
1.
Smith Falcons. Yeah, then you're the Arthur, and you're just punting every year. All right, one's the Jacksonville Jaguars. Going to be a big storyline this week with the way they played on Monday night. I talked myself into the Jaguars going into the season.
Too.
I know you did too.
Yeah.
And there was reason to. They were 8-3 last year. Trevor Lawrence battles 4 different injuries. They get bad turnover luck. They're dropping passes all over the place. It's like this team could rebound and win 9 or 10 games.
They drafted Brian Thomas Jr.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. I was in.
There was a case. Now they're 0-3, and we all know what's going to happen is that Doug Peterson's going to be out of a job sometime between now and the end of the season. And then there's going to be this conversation that I just mentioned. Is it Trevor Lawrence or is it the scheme and the coaching and the supporting cast, and they mismanaged the roster? Last 3 seasons, Bill, Trevor Lawrence has 39 turnovers. That's second to Josh Allen. And Josh Allen has so many high-level plays that I think the turnovers are like completely overrated because he makes up for them almost every single time. That just hasn't been the case with Trevor Lawrence. He has 25 fumbles over the last 3 seasons, second to Justin Fields. And the worst part, if you're a Jaguars fan, why they're number 1 on the bummer list, is that he's playing like the worst football of his career right now. I mean, before he was really good at avoiding sacks. Now he's getting sacked on 11% of his dropbacks. His accuracy is not good. He's not dealing with pressure. He had that interception Monday night. And so I think what happens is so many people cling to like what their draft evaluation was of a guy, and they're like, no, he had all the tools. He was a generational prospect, that we just become blind to what we've seen 4 years in the NFL. Like there's not much precedent for a guy having 53 starts in the NFL. And it's like, well, he's not great yet, but he's going to become great. Most of the time, we know at this point in his career. And so if you're a Jaguars fan, I'm not saying he's bad. Like I still kind of like Trevor Lawrence. He's young. I think he'll maybe have a moment down the road here or a season down the road where he looks really good. But I do think we need to kind of reset our expectations and be like, this isn't the guy who was getting drafted 1 overall. This is a guy we've watched in the NFL, and he's had one above average season as a starter.
The first 3 years were explainable.
Yeah.
Right? Urban Meyer. Last year he got hurt. So, and that was one of the reasons I was totally into them in year 4. It was like, here we go. He's going to be healthy. They finally got him a deep weapon. Like this is it. We're on, and it went backwards. And unfortunately, I've watched all 3 games. I have him on a fantasy team. I have Jaguars futures. And I really thought they were going to cover and possibly win last night. And within, a half hour, you knew where it was going. I don't know what the answers are. Like Ruiz was on my pod last week saying they're going to fire Peterson and bring in Belichick, and it's going to happen. And is Belichick going to put up with some of the shit Trevor Lawrence does? We've already seen that. We've already seen that with Mac Jones and Cam Newton, some of these other guys. So I don't know what it is, but it does make me wonder, should they have waited to do that extension? What was the benefits of doing the extension? Because you still have the franchise tag thing, right? You've never actually seen him be awesome, and you're just going to give him $275 million. Why not wait?
I think when you do that, then it becomes then you're going to be paying even more. So you're kind of taking a gamble that, this guy is going to be good enough. I also think that it's okay for them to have given that to him, because how coaches and teams in the NFL operate. If Trevor Lawrence was on the trade market right now,
people go after him.
I think you'd be shocked by what Trevor Lawrence would get.
But would he be worth more if he was on his original contract versus this giant extension?
Yeah, that's true. Then the team that trades for him, though, probably is like, well, we have to, as part of the trade, we have to sign him to a new deal as well. So I understand why teams do it. When you think you have a guy, you kind of want, you go earlier rather than later, because teams do get desperate. And if you really need to move off a guy, like the Eagles had to do with Carson Wentz a few years ago, he was the worst quarterback in the NFL. And they got great draft capital from the Colts. So I still lean towards pay. If you feel good about it, go ahead and pay them, because it's kind of like you always talk about with the NBA. It's still an asset. You're still going to be able to move off of them unless it's like a Deshaun Watson type situation. But he hasn't had the moment yet, and now it's just going to be like, all right, he's going to be on his 3rd coach in 5 years. Another offensive coordinator, and what's it going to look like? Maybe it'll happen for him. It still could. I think he can certainly be a solid starter, but kind of the guy we expected. Like, I was thinking about this. If you flip Josh Allen and Trevor Lawrence, those 2 quarterbacks on those 2 teams, I kind of think the Jaguars are a pretty good team, and the Bills are struggling to make the playoffs. Now, it might be unfair to compare him to Josh Allen, but that just kind of tells you the gap between sort of the elite guys and where someone like Trevor Lawrence might be right now.
It's pretty rare to just not have a moment for the first 4 years of your career and 60 plus starts, and then all of a sudden the light switch goes up. To borrow the NBA analogy, and then we'll go, it's a little like where the Bulls were with Zach LaVine, right? Where it's like, well, this guy scores 25 points a game. He's not a franchise guy, but we don't want to lose him either. And here's a lot of money, and now they can't even trade him. And I do feel like we've seen teams get into that bind with quarterbacks where like, well, if we don't have them, what are we going to do for a quarterback? And it's like, yeah, but you're a quarterback you can't win with. I think the difference here is, and I include the 2 of us, we both thought he was going to make a leap this year.
Yeah.
There's some sort of disconnect between the talent and what we're saying. That throw he made, that the Hamlin pick, guy was wide open. Only him and Anthony Richardson are making throws that bad in the league right now. Anthony Richardson is the all-time hit or miss guy. Lawrence isn't hitting. He's just missing. And I think that's the difference. All right. That was our bummer list. Sheil Kapadia. You can listen to him on the Ringer NFL show and on the Ringer Philly special. Read him on the ringer.com. He had a piece today. Good to see you, Sheil.
All right. Thanks for having me.